I've bought over 100 books in languages that I don't even speak. Why? Well, this is the Lifeline Book Fair. It comes to my city twice a year with around 100,000 books each time and even more in the larger cities. They sell donated books to raise money for a 24/7 crisis support center. And the first time I went, their foreign language section was an absolute goldmine for me because literally half of it was made of Swedish books. Ever since then, I make sure to get there. And even though it's never been quite as good as it was that first time, it's always a fun trip for a language nerd. So this time I thought I'd try to take you guys along. But long story short, this mic doesn't work, and I found that out after I recorded this and got back home and put the footage on my computer and everything. So allow me to dramatically reenact what I was saying here.
Hey guys, I'm trying to be cool and record a video in my car like I'm a vlogger. Pretty pointless to do this bit in the car anyway, but let's go check out the book fair. Alright, see you there.
This particular fair, the autumn of 2024 book fair, wasn't the best from a foreign language books perspective, but I did want to share with you some of the cooler finds that I've had over the years. I'm proud to say that my Swedish has progressed a little bit beyond the level of this book, but my son is about to turn 4 and he understands Swedish pretty well, so I thought this would probably be worth the 50 cents that they were asking for it. The last couple of times they've had a lot of Danish, and I mean a lot of Danish. One of them I grabbed was this, which is called The Chestnut Man in English. Now, I've already read this in Swedish, so I thought it would be handy to have just in case I ever wanted to learn some Danish vocabulary. I could totally do that by reading this book because I already know the story. This is also the original. The original language is Danish. By the way, that's a language hack that you may not have heard before. If you know the original story of something that you're then going to read in a target language, you can read at a much higher level than you normally would be able to. Now, obviously, it's not going to work for stuff like Mandarin if you only speak English, but for something like Danish from Swedish, I mean, obviously that's very, very close. But even if this was, say, in Dutch or German, I'd probably be fine. Also, as a side note, this book is really good. I recommend it in whatever language you can find it in or want to read it in. If you can't be bothered with the book, the Netflix series is actually almost as good. I would say they're pretty much on a par. The Netflix series is a good watch. By the way, if you're not familiar with immersion learning, it's basically the idea of putting yourself in situations where the language carries some level of meaning for you to allow your brain to get better at piecing together that meaning, which will eventually lead you to be able to have thoughts and express those thoughts spontaneously in the language without referring to a translation or some rule that you've memorized about the language. It's generally accepted in the research to be how we all learn languages anyway, but we've become kind of convinced of this idea that we have to consciously study the rules of a foreign language in order to actually learn it. Probably took me around 2 years from when I first heard the idea to actually come round to that way of thinking. So if you want to know more about how you can become an effective immersion learner, a company called Refold have put together a comprehensive video course on just that. Now, I know you might be thinking something like, this sounds like a scam, someone call CoffeeZilla. Just hang on with that because it's only a 30-day course, but there is a 60-day money-back guarantee. So even if you complete the course and then later think, nah, that wasn't worth it, which honestly I doubt, but even if you do that, you can still get your money back. And also, I know these people. They are super nice guys. They are really into language learning themselves. I've stayed with them, and the topic of language learning and effective language learning was on like most of the time we were there. Ethan, Ben, Alberto, they are all super nice guys, but also they are like very effective and knowledgeable language learners too. They're not just nice people. I mean, that matters, but it doesn't matter as much as what they know and what they can teach you. So as a company, I highly recommend them, but also as a course to learn as much as you possibly could about immersion learning and how to become an effective learner so that you can learn your language well. I do recommend their ultimate immersion course. So the link for that is in the description or at the top of the comments, and it might be easier to access one or the other depending on what kind of device you're on. If you want to use that, it does help me out. If you don't want to, that's fine. Back to the book fair. The prices are always written in the top corner of the first page, which is handy to just remember that that's where I got it from. And if some of the prices that I say or that you see in this video seem cheap to you, yeah, that's pretty much Australia. We're very lucky in that regard. When it comes to used books, they are very cheap. This skit by Fairbun Films sums it up really well.
Unfortunately, that one's not on sale, so that's going to be $2.
$2?
Yeah, sorry. No, that's unbelievably good value.
Oh, if you say so.
And then consider that for a lot of these books, I'm actually picking them up on the Sunday, the last day, which is when everything drops to 50% off. 11 Minutes by Paulo Coelho. I've got 2 copies of this, one in Danish and one in Spanish. And even though it's reasonably common to come across Portuguese books here in Australia, finding Paulo Coelho in his original Portuguese, it's become like the Ark of the Covenant at this point. This is one of my wife's favorite books, but it's in Norwegian. I haven't read it yet, but I really like seeing these, I'd say, more niche books translated, especially into smaller languages like Norwegian, Finnish, stuff like that, because it's kind of a reminder that even in places like that where the level of English is really high, the local language or the native language is still valued, and I would even say preferred. And needless to say, I don't like the attitude that it will all just be replaced by English, because at the very least, it's a very boring way to approach your life. But I also think it's pretty dismissive, like, oh, it's like your little language doesn't matter, and just because I can't be bothered to learn it. And speaking of less widely spoken languages, I'm not going to say what the language is because one day I want to do a whole video on it, but this is one of the most amazing finds from the book fair ever. It's a Bible, as you can see, but translated into a very endangered language. It's also really beautifully presented. It's got lovely print, nice binding. As far as I'm concerned, this is a work of art. This title right here sums up why the foreign language section at these book fairs is so much fun for people like me. We've got a Swedish author with a book called The Italian Shoe in German. From the perspective of what you might call guided immersion, or material that is for a native speaker but with help for non-native speakers, I've got far more Spanish than anything else. Quick tour, 12 short stories to improve your vocabulary. I didn't pick this up from the book fair. I actually went and picked it up from the author himself. He's a Spanish linguist. The complete poetry of a certain now shamed Chilean author, side by side, Spanish on this side, English on this side. And although yes, what he did is obviously horrible, I am personally of the opinion that that should not mean that no one ever reads his poetry again. This is an opinion that I share with Chilean and feminist author Isabel Allende. Speaking of whom, I do have a couple of her books, mostly in Spanish. I do have some in English as well. I would probably need to listen or read in English or Swedish first, but she is actually really widely translated, so that's definitely a possibility. I do have a lot more Spanish. I can't show it all to you. We'd be here all day, so moving on. When I asked you guys which languages you felt had a greater number of learners than the amount of material available to learn those languages with would reflect, i.e. which languages have more demand than supply, one of the most common and I would say well-founded answers was modern Greek. And lo and behold, the next day I come across this. It's huge. Now, obviously a book like this is much more traditional classroom learning, skill building than it is mass immersion style, but when it comes to a language like Greek, where there isn't going to be that much comprehensible input for you to actually learn with, there's just no world in which I can picture that this isn't worth paying $4 for. These 5 German books were a curious find from the last book fair, and even though I'm not learning German and I don't speak very much German, I bought all 5 because they look like a really kind of comprehensible input level for a lot of German learners. I feel like adult learners who are at about maybe B1 could really get something out of this. At this most recent one, I also picked up a German copy of The Hobbit. Now, don't ask me why, but in the German title, they feel the need to specify that he is a little hobbit. I'm not sure why this is, but one language that is there with new books, like different books in this language every single time, is Hungarian. Now, I have never bought any of it except for this Hungarian dictionary, which doesn't really count, I guess, but I've come to be able to recognize Hungarian on site. One thing that was there this time but hasn't been there before is Romanian. And look, I'm sorry, but these 1001 To Do Before You Die books have gotten completely out of hand. If you're not familiar with this series, it started like 20 years ago with 1001 movies you must see before you die. Then it got less realistic. There were things like 1001 golf courses you must play before you die. But I do own some of the more sensible versions of those books, like 1001 songs to hear before you die. Yes, okay, you can listen to 1,000 songs, that's possible. 1001 days that shaped the world, that's fair enough. You can read about the days and broaden your knowledge. But by far the stupidest one of all of them is this one that I saw yesterday, 1001 bikes to dream of riding before you die. No, they're push bikes. They are push bikes. You're overthinking it. Don't be stupid. I'm not learning Urdu, but normally when they say pocket phrase book or pocket dictionary, you know it's not fitting in anyone's pocket. There's no way you're getting those books in a pocket. But when Norwegian or Urdu say it, they mean business, baby. One of my favorite formats is these quality landscape photography books, not just because I'm really into photography, but because even if they're in a language that I speak nothing of, the book still serves its purpose. But if, like this German one, I can understand some of it, it makes trying to read the captions this kind of little dessert on top of the beautiful photos. I've got some Finnish just because I can't resist languages from the north. I don't speak a word, but I do like it. These three are my Dutch collection, I guess. At least one of these is available on Storytel in Dutch. So I think with my Swedish and everything, pretty sure scuba diving from day one would be possible. But also this one here is translated from Swedish, so I know that it is on Storytel in Swedish. Speaking of Belgium and I guess around into the French speaking part of the world, I still do have a lot of French left over from when I was learning it and just picked up a couple of times since, because if I ever do want to get back into learning French, I've got things that I can get started on straight away with that, like Artemis Fowl. I would assume that that would be at a very decent level for my kind of French. And finally, I've got a much smaller amount than I would expect of Italian here and there on my shelves. I say a much smaller amount because it's actually the second most spoken language in my city, but given that fact, it's really not that common to find Italian books at these kinds of book fairs and op shops. In fact, this copy of Aragon in Italian actually came from Mexico City because I was an idiot. I was in a secondhand bookshop in Mexico and didn't actually think to check what language it was in. I was just like, yep, that's Aragon. It's in Mexico. It's in Spanish. It was not in Spanish. And then just yesterday, I also picked up the first book, I think, of a series of unfortunate events in Italian. So next time, I won't be as much of an idiot, I promise, and I will actually check that my microphones are working, and I'll try and take you guys along for the adventure and we can see what we find together. That sounds lame, but you know what I mean. I'm really into this kind of hunting for material side of language learning. In fact, I'd say it's my favorite aspect of language learning. Let me know what you guys have found at this kind of stuff, at op shops and book fairs and whatever over the years. I'm actually interested to hear it. And as always, lo quiero.